My name is Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 67, widowed for 3 years, and I always thought I understood my family. I thought I knew who loved me, who respected me. That morning, on Christmas, all of that changed in a single, cutting moment. I remember standing in the living room of my son Kevin and his wife Ashley's home. The tree smelled like fresh pine. The children's laughter filled the air, but I felt a cold weight pressing against my chest. I had asked Kevin for a small favor, something I thought was reasonable, $100 to cover a new prescription my doctor insisted I needed. It was nothing extravagant, barely more than a few cups of coffee a week. But what I heard in response was nothing I expected. Ashley's words cut through the holiday warmth like ice. I was a burden, a cost to their family. Kevin laughed, not nervously, not softly, but genuinely laughed at me. I felt the heat of humiliation and hurt rise in my chest, and for a brief second, I froze. But something inside me didn't shatter. Instead, a quiet clarity settled over me. I realized that my life, my sacrifices, the love I had poured into my son and my family, had been taken for granted. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I would show them, not with anger, but with truth. I would reveal exactly what costs I had been covering all these years, and maybe, just maybe, make them see the life they had been blind to. I think that's when I first felt the stirrings of power in my own hands, a realization that the person they underestimated the most, the quiet, obedient, overlooked mother, was still very much in control. And in a few minutes, everything in that room would shift, starting with a single sentence I had kept tucked in my mind. That sentence would change everything. Little did I know. This Christmas morning was about to become one I would never forget. Not for the gifts or the decorations, but for the truths that were about to come crashing into our lives. And as I stood there, I couldn't help but wonder how far they would let themselves go before the walls they built around themselves started to crumble. I want to step back a little and explain how I ended up standing there on that Christmas morning, feeling small and invisible in my own family. After my husband passed 3 years ago, I thought I would finally have some peace, but the reality was different. I lived alone, on a fixed income, taking care of myself and slowly adjusting to life without him. And yet, I had a son, Kevin, who I raised alone after my husband's passing. A son I loved fiercely and wanted to see succeed. Kevin was 32 now, married to Ashley, who carried herself with a confidence that often felt like armor. They had 2 kids, Emma and Tyler, bright and full of energy. I adored them, and I always tried to make our visits warm, helpful, and supportive. Over the years, I had quietly covered expenses here and there, helping with tuition, extracurricular activities, and even vacation plans. I never thought much of it. I was proud to support my family, but I never expected it to be twisted into something I shouldn't have done. That morning, the house was decked out for Christmas, ornaments gleaming, presents stacked neatly under the tree. The smell of fresh cinnamon rolls drifted through the air, making me remember the holidays I used to host for my own family when Kevin was little. Emma and Tyler tore through wrapping paper with joy, their laughter echoing in the house. I waited until the chaos calmed, trying to gather my courage before asking Kevin for help with my new prescription. I didn't want to make a scene, and I didn't expect resistance. I simply needed $100 to cover the medication. Medicare wouldn't, but when I brought it up, the words that met me were sharp and cutting. Ashley's voice carried that unmistakable tone of disdain. telling me that I contributed nothing but costs to the family. And Kevin, my own son, the boy I had raised through long nights and hard work, he laughed. That moment, more than anything, made me realize that love and family had been taken for granted. I had always been there for them, giving silently, always expecting that they would understand. But they had built a version of reality in which my presence was an inconvenience. I think it was that clarity that sparked something in me. I wasn't just hurt. I was suddenly aware of the imbalance and the injustice. I had been the one quietly sustaining their lifestyle, and they had no idea. The mortgage, the utilities, the extras for Emma and Tyler, the vacations, they had all been possible because of me. And now, after being dismissed as a burden, I knew I had to respond in a way that would make them see exactly what I had contributed. I remembered the late nights when I worked extra shifts just to keep the family afloat, the countless small sacrifices no one noticed. It wasn't about showing off or seeking credit. It was love. But love, I realized, shouldn't be met with scorn. That morning, standing in their living room, I felt a quiet determination settle over me. I had a plan, and it didn't require yelling or tears. It required truth. And the truth, I knew, would shift everything. As I looked around at the perfectly decorated room, I also felt a sense of calm. The children were laughing, unaware of the tension. The tree shimmered, and yet beneath the surface, a storm was about to break. And in that stillness, I began to prepare myself for the moment I would turn the tables, revealing the reality of who was really holding this family together. That moment, I knew, was only the beginning. What came next would change everything for us and force Kevin and Ashley to confront truths they had ignored for far too long. The room went silent when I brought up the small request for my prescription. I could feel every eye on me, every heartbeat in the room echoing louder than it should. Ashley's words hit me harder than I expected. She painted me as a burden, someone who added nothing but costs. And Kevin, he laughed. I wanted to vanish, to shrink into the corner, but I reminded myself to breathe. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of revealing what had been hidden for years. I let the silence linger, letting them feel the weight of their words. Then I told myself quietly, as if speaking to a friend in my own head, that if I was a burden, I would show them exactly what that meant. I reminded myself of the thousands I had quietly contributed, the $7,000 a month for the mortgage, the utility bills, the landscaping service, the kids' music and sports lessons. All these things they had assumed were just part of life, unnoticed and unacknowledged, had been covered by me. And suddenly, the air shifted. The smugness, the dismissiveness, they began to falter. I watched Ashley's face slowly change from confidence to confusion to disbelief. She realized the life she thought she had built with Kevin had been funded largely by my hard work, my savings, and my insistence on keeping the family afloat. Kevin's reaction was more telling. He stammered, his voice unsteady. I remembered the boy I raised, the young man I had guided with patience and care, now caught in a moment where the truth could no longer be hidden. I reflected on all the quiet sacrifices I had made, the vacations for the kids, the piano lessons, the small repairs, the everyday contributions that had kept their lives comfortable. I remembered how it felt when I had handed over checks or paid bills without a second thought, trusting that love was enough to sustain these relationships. But love alone, I realized, doesn't prevent deception. And now, I could see clearly that showing them the truth would teach them a lesson in gratitude and respect. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. I had always believed in fairness, in honesty, in being present for my family. And yet, I had been underestimated. That quiet, underestimated presence that was my advantage now. I held all the pieces of reality, all the knowledge of what had truly been happening behind the scenes. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, private sense of satisfaction. I thought about the lessons I wanted to impart, that care and contribution are not to be taken lightly, that people often assume they are entitled to support without recognizing the effort behind it. I felt the familiar warmth of resolve, the kind I hadn't felt since raising Kevin alone. Those long nights spent guiding him through life's lessons. In that moment, standing in the decorated living room, I realized that Christmas morning would not be remembered for gifts or festive cheer, but for the unveiling of truth. The revelation I was about to make would shake the foundation of the household, and I was ready to witness that shift. As I prepared to speak again, I reminded myself to remain calm, to let the facts and quiet strength speak louder than anger. Because sometimes, the most powerful statement comes from the truth presented without malice, only clarity. And with that, I was ready to turn the first page of this confrontation, showing them exactly who had been carrying the weight all along. As the room settled into an uneasy quiet, I felt the first true crack in the illusion they had built. The moment I revealed the mortgage and bills I had been covering, Ashley's composure faltered. It was subtle at first, a pause, a flicker of doubt, but then I saw it fully, the realization that their perfect life was not entirely theirs. And Kevin, my son, the one I had raised, could no longer hide behind his usual calm. He was scrambling, trying to explain, trying to convince me that he had not been lying entirely, that he had only simplified the truth. I thought back on all the little things I had noticed over the years, the way expenses for vacations or kids' activities were always covered without acknowledgement. The quiet little gestures I made to keep the household running smoothly. It was love. Yes, but it had also been invisibility cloaked in generosity. And now, with the tension in the air, I realized that my silence had allowed their deceptions to grow unchecked. The more I reflected, the more I saw the pattern. Kevin had forged documents, kept secret debts, and even taken out a life insurance policy on me. Each revelation hit like a punch, yet I stayed calm, reminding myself that panic or anger would not serve me. I needed clarity, focus, and patience. I began to consider the implications carefully, thinking about the ways I could protect myself and ensure justice, not for revenge, but for safety and fairness. Ashley's expressions shifted from shock to fear as I quietly laid out the truth in my mind, walking through every hidden payment, every lie she had been told, every carefully concealed debt. I remembered the Christmas mornings I had spent quietly paying for their lives, always hoping my efforts were appreciated, always hoping love would be enough. And yet here they were, exposed by nothing more than honesty. I allowed myself a moment to breathe and observe. Kevin tried to shift blame, tried to manipulate the narrative, but I had seen it all. The calm voice inside me reminded me that power often comes quietly, by keeping meticulous records and paying attention to every detail. I had a map of the household's finances, a silent ledger of truth that now gave me leverage. I could see their faces as the reality sank in the panic, the disbelief, the sense of being caught. And in that stillness, I felt something unexpected, a sense of justice, not cruel, but inevitable. I had lived my life with integrity, and now that integrity was the shield and the instrument of accountability. I reflected on how often people underestimate those who seem quiet, those who follow rules, those who give without question. It's a dangerous mistake. In the space between their panic and my resolve, I knew the next steps had to be careful but decisive. This was more than money. It was about trust, safety, and finally claiming the respect that had long been denied. I also knew that what came next would bring more revelations about debts, about documents, and about the true extent of their deception. I allowed myself a small, private acknowledgement of the power I held, not over them in a vindictive way, but over the truth itself. And with that, I prepared to take the next step, to bring in outside accountability, and to ensure that the lies and manipulations could no longer continue. By the time I realized the full extent of Kevin and Ashley's deception, I knew I couldn't handle it alone. Their lies had grown into a pattern that I could not ignore, and my own safety and the well-being of others demanded action. I took a deep breath and made the call, reaching out to the authorities with a mix of fear and resolve. I reminded myself that I was not doing this to punish out of spite, but to protect myself, to set boundaries, and to ensure justice for anyone else who might be at risk. Cooperating with the police was a strange mixture of reassurance and anxiety. I felt empowered knowing the truth was on my side, yet vulnerable, as if every step I took could provoke an unpredictable response from Kevin. I reflected on the years I had spent giving silently, trusting that my son and his family valued honesty and integrity. That trust had been misplaced, but now it became my shield as I navigated this delicate path. I remember sitting with the detectives, laying out every document, every transaction, every instance of manipulation I had uncovered. The feeling of control, finally, was intoxicating but tempered by the seriousness of the situation. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about showing off knowledge or power. It was about setting things right. Each detail I revealed brought a little more clarity and a little more weight to the consequences awaiting Kevin and Ashley. When it came time to meet Ashley at the coffee shop, I steeled myself. I had to act as if nothing had changed, as if I was still the trusting mother, while secretly recording the conversation. Inside, I reflected on all the moments I had shared with her, the holidays, the dinners, the seemingly small interactions that had masked her true intentions. And yet, despite everything, I focused on listening, observing, and allowing her own words to reveal the truth. As the conversation unfolded, the reality of her complicity became clear. She had been part of the scheme longer than I anticipated, but the careful planning of law enforcement ensured that every confession was documented. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The betrayal was profound, but the accountability was undeniable. Kevin's arrest was surreal. The boy I had raised, once full of promise and kindness, now confronted with the consequences of his decisions. I felt a wave of emotions: grief for the son I thought I knew, relief that the manipulation had ended, and a cautious hope that perhaps this would prevent him from hurting anyone else. I reflected on how often family dynamics hide the truth, how trust can be weaponized, and how critical it is to recognize and act when boundaries are crossed. In that moment, standing amidst the authority and evidence, I felt clarity and calm settle over me. The chaos of betrayal had given way to structure and resolution. I knew there were more revelations to come, more details to uncover. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life, my finances, and my safety. And as I walked away from that meeting, I realized that the true victory was not just in legal action, but in reclaiming my own sense of dignity, my ability to trust my instincts, and the courage to confront deception head-on. After the arrests and the dust began to settle, I found myself alone in my living room, surrounded by quiet that felt both foreign and comforting. I kept thinking about the years of effort, of love, of giving without expectation, and how it had been misunderstood or overlooked. But now, the imbalance had been corrected, not through anger, but through clarity and persistence. I felt a deep sense of relief knowing that justice had been served and that my boundaries had finally been respected. I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me about family, trust, and resilience. Blood doesn't automatically mean loyalty, and proximity doesn't guarantee honesty. I realized that real family is not simply those who share your last name, but those who treat you with respect, care, and integrity. Even though Kevin had been my son, I had to accept that love alone could not protect me from deceit. It was a painful realization, but a necessary one. In those quiet moments, I also thought about Ashley and the role she had played, both in complicity and in the eventual exposure of truth. It was complicated, understanding that her actions, while wrong, were driven by fear and the influence of someone she trusted and lived with. It reminded me that people often make choices based on survival or self-interest, even at the expense of others. And that part of growing older is learning to navigate these realities without losing your own sense of self. I found solace in reconnecting with the grandchildren, Emma and Tyler. Their laughter and simple affection became a reminder that not all relationships are tainted, and that love can still exist in its purest forms, untouched by adult conflicts. I realized that my role in their lives could still be meaningful, nurturing, and filled with joy. These moments of connection reinforced the idea that family, in its truest sense, is built on presence, support, and honesty rather than expectation or obligation. I also reflected on the broader impact of my actions. By cooperating with the authorities, I wasn't only protecting myself, I was protecting other vulnerable families from potential harm. It gave me a sense of purpose beyond personal vindication. I began to think about advocacy, about helping others recognize manipulation and deception before it escalates. I felt a responsibility to share what I had learned, to offer guidance to those who might one day face similar challenges. As I looked out the window at the snow falling softly over the neighborhood, I felt a quiet sense of empowerment. I had reclaimed control over my life, my finances, and my emotional well-being. I had stood up to deception with patience and strategy, and in doing so, I had found a renewed sense of self-respect and inner peace. I realized that the journey was just as much about understanding my own strength as it was about holding others accountable. In the end, this experience reshaped my understanding of family, trust, and resilience. I had survived betrayal, navigated deception, and emerged with clarity and compassion. And as I prepared to embrace each new day, I carried with me the lesson that integrity, vigilance, and self-respect are the foundations for meaningful relationships and personal peace. Sitting on my front porch as the sun began to set, I felt a warmth that had been missing for far too long. The house was finally quiet, truly mine, free from deceit and manipulation. I thought about the twists and turns of the past months, the shock, the betrayal, and the slow unraveling of lies. Yet in all of it, I discovered something profound, the strength to stand firm, to reclaim my life, and to protect the people who mattered most. I reflected on the grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, and how much their trust and love reminded me of the simpler, genuine connections that truly define family. Despite the hurt caused by Kevin and Ashley, I realized that the essence of family isn't about control or bloodlines, it's about care, honesty, and the courage to set boundaries when necessary. I felt proud knowing that my actions not only safeguarded my own well-being, but also helped prevent further harm to others who might have been victims of deception. As I sat there, sipping my tea and feeling the crisp evening air, I understood that peace is not simply the absence of conflict. Peace is knowing you acted with integrity, that you navigated difficult circumstances with patience, wisdom, and heart. I thought about how many people may be silently carrying burdens like mine, feeling unseen or undervalued in their own homes. I wanted to remind them that recognizing your worth and standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. I smiled as my phone buzzed with a message from Emma, asking if she could come visit this weekend. Her simple words made my heart swell. I realized that, after all the turbulence, there was still joy to embrace, still love to nurture, and still life to live on my own terms. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, remember that your strength and your truth matter. Stand firm, protect your peace, and cherish the connections that are genuine. And if this story touched you, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because every voice matters and every story deserves to be heard.